Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Marab Dvalishvili of Helping You Grab Your Villy. Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast. Coming at you following UFC 252. How was this a pay-per-view? That should have been the subtitle, but the subtitle was Miocic versus Cormier 3. You always have to have the champion's name first, which is a pain in the arse in like series of 3 fights where they switch the title. And you have to introduce the champ second. These are the things that we do, just little rituals in combat sports. And if you don't know them, people get mad at you. Or if you forget to respect them. I suppose really we're at the end of an era, because following Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic 3 on Saturday night, I tweeted, all 3 of your heavyweight GOAT fights have been marred by eye pokes, fix your fucking gloves. It was wildly successful and critical acclaim was showered on that tweet, except by the mugs who were then like, I think you'll find DC's were way worse than Stipe's, or Stipe's didn't matter. But at this point, like, this sport is so bollocks. You get eye pokes for free because the referees think that the glove, there are genuinely accidental eye pokes, but they aren't happening that often. There's an awful lot of eye pokes that people either do deliberately or they just don't have to care about putting their fingers out there because they're so rarely punished for it. The reason that everyone asks for the gloves to be changed, except for the few cretins who think that like gloves are actually the only thing stopping it, that eye pokes never happened in Pride or some shit. But by changing the gloves to a curved design, you at least remove that benefit of the doubt that you have to give everyone right now. Make them fight in curved gloves where you have to physically open your hand, and suddenly eye pokes, we can just immediately deduct a point for them. I mean, it's not helped by, like, a lot of commissions having rules whereby the ref can only look at the video if he's already stopped the fight to determine, like, a DQ or a no contest. Realistically, the referee should be allowed to look at the replay immediately and be like, yeah, that went in your eye, or yeah, that was a low kick, or no, you're clearly faking that low kick, Matt Brown, or Crow Cop, or whoever else did that. Or Josh Koscheck with the illegal knee against Paul Daly. But that would make far too much sense. So instead, we're going to have a sport that people bet real money on, decided by illegal actions. But yes, if you didn't, like, no light heavyweight title fight in the last 10 years has not had an eye poke, or has not been influenced in some way by the eye poke or the threat of the unpunished eye poke. Probably even further back than that, because before John Jones was a thing, Chuck Liddell won several fights with well-timed pokes to the eye as his opponent walked in. They used to call him the Eyesman, just everyone forgot because they were so upset because Jones does it so frequently and obviously. But then Daniel Cormier started doing it, Gustafsson does it, Stipe does it, just fucking everyone is doing it, especially if they're big and long. But yes, every light heavyweight championship fight for the last 10 years, plus all 3 fights in the heavyweight GOAT trilogy, or the UFC heavyweight GOAT trilogy, have been directly affected by eye pokes, which have gone unpunished and often, like, haven't even caused a stop in the action. So if you ever thought the UFC were going to get serious about the issue of eye pokes, no, they're not. There's the answer. But it's nice to get that off my chest because I was very impartial on that. I just didn't mention it in the Filthy Casuals guide and people got well mad about it. But yes, sticking your fingers in people's eyes does help fighting a lot. In fact, I would say prison rules, probably my favourite technique. Along with monkey steals a peach. But anyway, they had these 2 lads come out there. They fought an okay fight. I mean, it wasn't great, but compared to a lot of the other stuff on the card, it was fine. However, I just, like, some guys got so mad. I mean, it was weird how Stipe didn't hit the body at all until the 4th round. That's really bad game planning. Then they were like, yes, he did. He tried to get to the body earlier and the threat of the right hand stopped him. And then Stipe's own coaches were like, oh yeah, no, we hadn't seen the body stuff. That was all Stipe did that. And then he came out and just hit the body freely in round 1 and 2 with no repercussions. So shout out to angry randomers. But then he dropped it after the 3rd round anyway. But yeah, you'll notice like right off the bat. And this is where rematches are so different to original fights because you're not coming in fresh. You don't not know each other. You're not going to spar for a little while. You know the problems that you faced in the last match and you've made adjustments accordingly. So Daniel Cormier came out with his hands by his chin and his elbows tucked to his side. And instead of hands forward, palms out, going to Miocic's hands and stopping him from straight hitting, which meant that his elbows were nice and close so that he could try and stop the body shots even though he still got hit with them. But it also meant that he was jabbed up. for most of the first 2 rounds. And then in the third, he starts reaching for the hands again. And luckily, Stipe had basically abandoned the body shots by that point. But, it was weird watching Daniel Cormier fight without reaching for the hands. And you saw Stipe's jab and right straight much more effective as a result. But we got to see a little bit like old school Daniel Cormier, like back when he fought Bigfoot and so on. You know, he used to do a lot of jabs and jabs to the chest, followed by the left hook, and then the right hand, the 1-3-2. Great setup, does it really quick, and he caught Stipe with a number of them here. Also, because Cormier wasn't able to crowd Stipe in the same way, because he wasn't hands on hands and skewering him up the centre with the jab, Stipe was able to stand back a little bit further, get off his low kicks when he wanted to. Always been good at like applying low kicks. Like, it's not a huge part of his game, but he can knock people out of their stance, score points with it. He used them a lot against Ngannou. He'd show a shoulder fake, and Ngannou would start like moving for a big uppercut counter, and then go, oh fuck no, and then Stipe would kick his lead leg out. Did it about 5 or 6 times in that fight. It's a really nice little move because Ngannou sets his weight really heavily when he's loading up to punch. But yeah, lots of jabs and straights, basically by dealing with the issue that had been presented in the last minutes of the second fight. Cormier opened himself up to the stuff that he'd been dealing with so well, that is Stipe's standard game. You know, we talked about how him fighting like that allowed him to out-jab Stipe, even though Stipe is consensus the better boxer. As soon as he brought his hands back and started fighting more of an orthodox boxing style, Stipe was jabbing him up. Did like the fake level changes and leg grabs, jabs to the chest and stuff work really well. I mean, we're probably going to be talking about that later in the week because we're going to be talking about Frankie Edgar, who made a career out of jabbing the chest, jabbing the solar plexus, jabbing the face, and then jabbing the shoulder as he picked up the lead leg for a post-single. And if you don't know what post-single is, like, just go look at a Frankie Edgar takedown highlight on YouTube. I'm sure there's some, but it's the takedown that he hits over and over again. You slam the person in the shoulder with your hand like you're throwing out a jab, but you push them back so that you lighten their lead leg, catch behind their knee with your free hand, and you push them up onto one leg. Thing is that Cormier didn't really attack the wrestling. He showed the wrestling as a feint and then never really went to it. So the thing with that is that if you repeatedly show a fake and then never actually throw the thing for real, the guy will start to disregard the thing that you're faking. And that can be really helpful to you because if you do start throwing the thing that you're showing him, you'll probably catch him cold. But Cormier really didn't seem that interested in actually picking up the leg too much in this one. Stipe did well in the clinch, did a really good job of sticking to Cormier, pushing him to the fence. He did well in the second fight, and the first fight actually, with knees to the body. All his successful breaks along the fence when Cormier was trying to dig the underhook or had dug the underhook and turned him onto the fence, came off good knees to the body. Another example of just body work working really well on Cormier. But in this one, he was able to do a bit of what Cormier had done to Frank Mir, which is sort of just underhook. And this was back when there was a sort of grey area about whether you could put your forearm on top of the cage. I think it was Herb Dean reffing that fight, and he was just like, yes, you can do that. You can't hold, but you can put your arm on top of the cage. And then a year or two later, they just started calling people for putting their arm on top of the cage. Because reffing is largely making things up and then justifying them in the aftermath. Shout out to Mark Goddard for putting out a statement about the eye poke in this one, because it was Stipe's left hand. Was it left hand? When he got a finger in Cormier's eye, and Cormier's eye immediately closed. Which, you know, first 2 fights, Cormier's fingers were in Stipe's eyes plenty. It's not great. It's not a great thing for the sport for that to be happening all the time. I don't care if you're like, well, Cormier did it in 2 fights, Stipe only caught him with a good one in this one. It's all still bad. But yeah, just the end of this fight, like, it was a decision, went 4 rounds to 1 on 2 cards, 3 rounds to 2 on 1 card. Like, it was not an amazing blow-off to what was supposed to be like the biggest heavyweight rivalry ever. But, you know, Stipe fought smart. Cormier tried to make an adjustment to fight smarter. And that actually opened him up to the original plan of attack that Stipe always does against everyone. So now we get, well, I was going to say we get Stipe versus Ngannou, but there have been developments. Because unable to allow Daniel Cormier to retire in peace, John Jones used this chance to say, hey guys, I'm vacating the light heavyweight title. And then people were like, he's going up to heavyweight, and then he said, no, actually, I'm retiring, but I will stay in the USADA testing pool Luke Thomas got a video out about this between the first tweet and the second tweet, which were about an hour apart, where Jones then went back and said, I've had a great conversation with the UFC and I'm now moving to heavyweight. Which he's been claiming he'll do for the best part of a decade. He renegotiated with the UFC and came out of retirement faster than a stint in rehab. This dude is speedrunning life. But if he does, wonderful. That sounds great. Him versus Ngannou for the title shot. Very defensively savvy fighter, very good at entering clinches, very good at tying people up and wearing them out, very good at picking at you from range without getting hit. Certainly the thing that Jon Jones has been able to avoid for the most part is heavy punching. If you put in a heavy puncher with Jon Jones, normally it's a case of, he's going to backtrack and kick him in the legs and kick him in the body and maybe wrestle them if they get too close. Or duck in on a takedown right off the bat and really make them fear that so that they can't open up. Either way, Daniel Cormier's out of the game now, apparently. He did kind of leave it open, he said, unless I get a title fight, which sort of holds the door ajar for either Jon Jones wins heavyweight title, Daniel Cormier comes back to fight him, or more likely a Uriah Faber situation where the UFC is like, we need someone to step in because we got fucking no names on this card since the main event dropped out. And then they go, Dan, you're already on for commentary. What kind of shape are you in? Here's a fight against Junior Albini or some shit. But anyway, show your respects to Daniel Cormier. Go out and unionize your workplace. Poke your boss in the eye. And it was a fun run. So if you remember when we talked about this card last week, I said I get a lot of shit from people for shitting on cards sometimes when they are all right. But this one looked crap right from the start as a pay-per-view. I mean, it wasn't great as a fight night, but it turned out crap. So, sometimes I'm on the money with predicting whether cards are bad. It's not a great superpower, but it'll do. The standouts to me on this card were, we'll talk about the co-main event because it was weird, and because I put so much time into evaluating what I thought would be an awesome matchup, and then it fucking ended in it ended in 4 minutes, but it seemed like nothing happened. But the standout of the card for me was Daniel Pineda. Great job on his part. He came back after, 4 or 5 years away from the UFC? Got a really mixed professional record. Has had a lot of trouble in the past with good fighters, but clearly, I don't want to say savvy vet, and in good condition. And he was fighting Herbert Burns, who obviously everyone has their eye on because he's Gilbert Burns' brother, and everyone now knows who Gilbert Burns is, even though they didn't 6 months ago. But he's always been a very promising guy. He knocked out Nate Landwehr in his UFC debut with a knee to the head. And what was his follow-up fight? Oh yeah, he strangled Evan Dunham. Oh, which would be why Evan Dunham was cut, because I couldn't remember how he was doing last week. But yeah, Herbert Burns, really interesting fighter. Jiu-jitsu savant like his brother. Getting decent in the striking, has Henry Hooft in his corner and stuff. But I thought Daniel Pineda did an amazing job. Came out, struck with him well, pushed him to the fence, took him down, which is not what you expect from against the jiu-jitsu savant who, in his last fight, took the guy down, got on his back in an instant. But it was I was watching it with a big smile because it was showing exactly what we're always talking about. The guard is not nearly as scary a place to operate when there is a wall behind you, or rather when there is a wall behind the person whose guard you are in. Because, basically, all the good guard attacks come down to how you can move your hips and how you can scooch back. And, shrimping is the number one thing that everyone does in jiu-jitsu. It's the thing you learn on day one. You learn how to put one foot on the floor, base on your shoulder and that foot, shrimp your hips back. And that applies to all sorts of situations. Shrimping back is how you make space, how you get your knee shield back in and then you recover guard. It's how you get a butterfly hook in from half guard. It's and it all links in with putting the feet on the hips and turning turning yourself around for arm bars and things like that. Can't really do that if your head's smushed against the cage. And the example I always use is Frankie Edgar versus Yair Rodriguez. There are dudes who Frankie Edgar fought who he knew were good at using the cage to stand up. So, who was it? Might have been Gray Maynard. But he took a couple of guys down like this, took them down against the fence with the underhook, and then used the underhook to, he rocked back onto his own knees in closed guard and turned the guy around. He picked them up and turned them around so they were facing towards the center of the cage. Against Yair Rodriguez, who was advertised as he's not scared if you take him down, he's so active from the guard, he'll submit you. He just pushed him to the fence, stood up over him, pressed his own head into the fence as he was tripoding up, stacking Yair's hips up over his shoulders and drop punches. Because especially if his head's pressed against the fence as he's standing, you can't get your leg over it to attack the armbar. The real threat from like the bottom position, or rather the real threat when you're in someone's guard, is, unless they're really good with elbows, is generally them getting a butterfly hook in. You're seeing more and more of this nowadays. Butterfly guard to create space and stand up. Or butterfly guard 2 feet on the hips to just leg press off and stand up. But yeah, Pineda did a great job, just held him by the fence, beat him up. Round 2, he passed his guard beautifully, and that's just the difference between being fresh after giving a round of ass kicking versus being tired. It doesn't matter the level of skill. If someone's absolutely knackered and you're still in shape and you know roughly what you're doing, you've probably got a bit of an edge on them. So he sliced through Herbert Burns' guard like butter, and it was a lovely knee slice, and he went straight into a mounted crucifix and then beat him up from there for the TKO, which is a horrible position anyway. But if you're going to Hulk strength your way out of it, you're not going to do it when you're already knackered in round 2. So Daniel Pineda, performance of the night, no doubt. And I think they did give him that bonus. And then the other 2 cards on the main, the other 2 fights on the main card were Merab Dvalishvili, whose name I said correctly in the introduction, I imagine. So just paste that in here. Versus John Dodson, and what he did really well was just keep John Dodson on the back foot, and Dodson didn't look himself, because he's more active than that normally when guys he knocked Petr Yan down, because Petr Yan kept giving him aggression, and he's going to try and shoot left straights and dodge out the side door, but Merab managed to really shut him down. He was throwing weird spinning shit into right hands and so on. It was a bit messy, the stuff on the feet, and the takedowns were decent, but he couldn't really hold them at many points, but yeah, promising stuff from Merab, and it was nice to see John Dodson keep the shaved head. Then you had your big boys, the heavyweights, Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Junior Dos Santos. Pretty much went how I expected, in that Dos Santos showed a little bit of what made him good back in the day, but then got knocked out anyway. Probing with the body jabs and things, threw a couple of low kicks, did all right in the first round. Second round, Jairzinho gets him near the cage, steps in with I think it was a switching left hand to southpaw right hook. It was a weird little combination, but Junior Dos Santos gets himself too close to the fence. Most of his defense relies on retreat, so he was just there, chin up in the air, gets hit, gets knocked down. The sad story of Junior Dos Santos, who for a while we were like, who can beat this man at heavyweight? You know, when they put Frank Mir in against him for his first heavyweight title defense, he just murdered him. He looked really good for a while. But time makes fools of us all. I mean, him and Kane, they were the only people worth caring about at heavyweight for quite a while. And then they just dropped off a cliff, both of them. Kane more due to injuries, and JDS probably more due to the beatings he took from Kane in the second and third fights. But let's talk about that co-main event, because it was the only thing that most of us cared about. I was so hyped for that co-main event. I did a big piece for the boys at the Fight Primer. If you're a Patreon boy, go check it out. Because there was some stuff in it that came up in the fight. I was just disappointed, really. I didn't mind a quick knockout either way. I just wanted to see more of this playing out, because it really hadn't got cooking before the stoppage. It shows you how poor this event was generally, or lacking in moments, that the calf kick and the ankle roll became the big thing in the next few days. People pouring over that shit with a fine-tooth comb. And I think, yeah, fine. He kicked him in the calf. He rolled his ankle. It happened to Henry Cejudo. I think Sean O'Malley also has some kind of pre-existing injuries that, have fucked him over. He had that really bad one against Sukhum Tath, but he might just be injury prone. Not going to say anything bad about Marlon Vera for kicking his leg, because we'd said in the pre-fight stuff, I mean, probably everyone said, they'll leave legs out there just because of how O'Malley fights. I think it's perfectly fine to say, yeah, it's completely legit to win by injury and follow-up, because guys have come back from similar injuries, or at least fought off their back from there, made an ugly fight out of it. Maybe you lose a decision, but you have made a fight out of it. Not to shame Sean O'Malley, of course, but just to say that that is a perfectly legitimate way to win a fist fight. But you can also say, I'm disappointed and would like to see them fight again, which is how I feel. However, some of the stuff we talked about really came up. Both these guys straight kicking. Sean O'Malley does great work with front kicks to the body, normally off the back leg from either stance. If you notice, when he does he really likes to do he'll throw his rear leg as a front kick to the body. So say he's orthodox, he kicks with his right leg, he puts his right foot down slightly in front of him, and then he steps out to his left into a southpaw stance. And then he follows up immediately. And that's the strength of O'Malley. We talked about this last week. He doesn't stop and look at what he's doing when he's switch hitting. He just hits. And that really helps him. Not to say that he's not picking his shots. I mean, that he doesn't switch stances and then stare at the guy while he's working out. Because so many guys do this. And then you lose the surprise of switching stances. The thing that he does is keep up offense from both stances while switching between them, which makes it very hard to keep up. However, we said in the pre-fight piece, I don't know if I said this on the podcast, but I said it in the article, I would have liked to see Marlon Vera switch stances as often as O'Malley, because so many switch hitters, they get such an edge from having a good left stance and right stance, orthodox stance and southpaw stance, and you staying in one position, so that they know, if you're orthodox and I'm switch hitting, I know when I'm orthodox, I'm working my jab, I'm working my outside low kick with my right leg. I switch to southpaw, I'm shooting the left straight and going down your right side, or I'm throwing left kicks into the body and the head. That's if I'm southpaw. And if you're orthodox, you attack your spinning techniques. And that's what O'Malley does. He sets his spinning techniques up from closed guards. He sets his open side kicks up from his open stance. But if the other guy's switching all the time, he can't just switch and bang. He can't just go, okay, I'm switching into southpaw, left kick to the body, which is where he does so well. And I said this happens in quite a few fights where you see switch hitters come out and then their opponent switches and they feel really uncomfortable and go back to their first stance. And it was giving O'Malley pause for thought in this one. He'd switch and Vera would switch as well. And then he'd go, oh, fuck, and switch back. And it happened a few times, like Vera did stay in his stance more than O'Malley stayed in his own, but it happened often enough that it was throwing O'Malley off, and I really liked that. Elbow to finish was gorgeous. I think O'Malley was trying to tie up the wrists, which is always kind of dangerous in MMA, because you can turn that elbow over so nicely, and Vera got it to like 12 o'clock, just beautiful, straight on the centre. There was some debate over the stoppage with Herb Dean, but I think it was clear that O'Malley didn't want to fight because, or rather, was unfit to continue fighting because he immediately grabbed his leg afterwards, didn't protest at all. But it does sort of like add to the Herb Dean being all over the map on stoppages. This is the guy who still insists that he never made a mistake with Jai Herbert. So good for Marlon Vera, because that's like was certainly the biggest name win of his career. I said in that article, there are two different kinds of prospects. O'Malley was coming up with the undefeated professional record and all the hype, and very much had as much of a casual MMA fan as you can be. Dudes knew Sean O'Malley. Whereas Marlon Vera was like the darling of people who watched undercards, because he was always entertaining, he was always finishing, and he was always turning up on undercards. But he was also like, he'd had some losses. He had some obvious weaknesses. He hadn't quite worked out what he is and who he is and what he does. Whereas O'Malley had that sort of confidence in who he is and what he does, which was interesting because Marlon Vera is always adding stuff. I did say that he gets a bit too confident in what he does on the feet or rather, he gives everything a go. Whereas O'Malley tends to stick to what he's good at. But got the job done. Move on, Marlon Vera. I mean, as much as I said I'd like a rematch, I would also like to see Marlon Vera move on because he had that great fight with Song Yadong, which I think he should have won, and he deserves to move forward in the division. Certainly, they were setting O'Malley up for like a Cody Garbrandt fight or something big if he won this one. So Marlon Vera should get something good. I mean, the entire prelim card was pretty meh. I mean, I think the Heavy Hands boys said the same thing. They're like, we're not talking about this; it's trash. But the standout fights for me from the prelims were the Fight Pass prelims. I thought Chris Dukas versus Parker Porter was funny because Parker Porter was shaped like a fridge and had really nice low kicks, actually. He's got the widest hips you've ever seen, but he turned him over real fast. And Chris Dukas had just showed you the benefits of shooting a straight right off the chest. His right hand came so up the centre inside his opponent's shoulder. Really nice. Everything else about it was a bit messy, but it was a good finish. And Kai Kamaka III, it says on Wikipedia, versus Tony Kelly was just a really fun fight. Like they started the broadcast with Fight of the Night, and it all just sort of rambled on from there. Kai Kamaka and Tony Kelly, I hope they get both of them back because we're in the age of like just sort of, you're seeing this even on pay-per-views. You've got guys who just came in at the last minute, like Daniel Pineda. And in fairness, Daniel Pineda had like the performance of his life here, but there's an awful lot of guys who haven't really made it to the UFC being put on these cards, and it's just so trying. And it's getting a bit old at this point. But Kai Kamaka and Tony Kelly, both fantastic, and they deserve to come back because that was a really crisp fight, I thought. Both of them looked sharp. Both of them looked clever. They were both coming up with new ideas. It really looked like Tony Kelly was going to run away with it right at the start, and then Kamaka, with his left hook, got back into it, throwing lovely combinations like jab to the chest and the left hook around the side, which is something I thought Stipe could have used well against Cormier if he had been using that really reaching mummy guard stuff. But yes, if you haven't seen the card, if you were waiting until Tuesday for Jack to drop his podcast, the ones you need to watch, really, I mean, you can watch the main event, but Daniel Pineda versus Herbert Burns and Kai Kamaka versus Tony Kelly, they're your ones. And if you want to get in on the arguing, Marlon Vera versus Sean O'Malley, but watching it won't give you a lot, to be honest. So that was that card. I mean, this weekend we got another bit of a weird one. It's Frankie Edgar versus Pedro Munoz, which I've been waiting for a while. I've been waiting for Pedro Munoz to come back for a while, to be honest. He may be slow as molasses, but he hits really hard and he finishes dudes with guillotines, so I like it. Plus, Austin Hubbard's back. I mean, that's about it. But I mean, I'll work out how I'm going to stretch content out of that when we get to the next podcast. But I'll probably do something on Frankie Edgar. He was in the original Advanced Striking, so for Advanced Striking 2.0, I did want to cover him. I think I might do something like that for the Patreon boys this week. But until then, let's do some questions. Hey Jack, long-time reader and recent Patreon boy here. My first question is regarding your obviously correct view that heavyweight MMA is, from a technical standpoint, shit. My question is, when would you say this observation first became true? Has heavyweight always been shit relative to other divisions? Or is it that the rest of the sport has evolved and the heavyweight's talent pool and metagame was stuck behind? Will you at least concede that Pride heavyweights were cool and good? Also, as a gambling man, I have to admit that I am always a little bitter when you reveal your betting picks after the events have taken place. I get that you're just betting for fun and not trying to seriously handicap, but I am sure I speak for many when I say we'd really appreciate access to even your most casual picks before the events. Maybe as a treat for the Patreon boys. Thanks for taking the time. From Casey. No, I like I said, I'm gambling the same £20 over and over again. I am not good at gambling. And one of the reasons that I've never made picks is that I don't want to advertise the idea that I can pick a fight. To me, it is guesswork. There are a lot, there's a few where you go, it's a bit of an obvious matchup there, because that's what matchmakers are often paid to do. They're paid to put on fights where they know most of the time the matchup between the styles will produce interesting results, or sometimes, unfortunately, they are supposed to put together matchups that make one guy look very good. And when you see that, and it's very obvious in Bellator, that's when you go, oh, okay, let's bet on that. Re-heavyweight, I think it has always been bad. Pride was a cool time in MMA, and obviously there have always been heavyweights who are technically better than a lot of heavyweights, like your Josh Barnett's, your Krokops, Prime Krokop, your Fedor Emelianenko, Cain Velasquez, JDS when he was at his best. But then you get to the point where it is still just two big guys hitting each other. And I think one of the interesting things about heavyweight is that you've got that incredibly old average age. The average age of top 20 heavyweights is like nearing 40. Whereas in the other divisions, you are gone. But I think some of that is to do with the, power being the last thing to go. It's been a cliche in boxing forever, but it does seem to be true. If you're a 240-pound man and you can swing a good shot, you're always going to be able to do that. But I think also speed, some of the reason we see some of these horrible drop-offs like Gino Dos Santos is that speed and durability do take a hit, generally. Whether it's Roy Nelson, Mark Hunt, Ben Rothwell, whoever, these great heavyweight chins, they don't hold up forever. Which is, I think, why heavyweight gets so tragic, because you can, based on being the first man to land, probably by accident, you can get 3 wins in a row and get a title shot, even if you are pretty shot. Add to that, as always, we are not getting the best athletes in heavyweight MMA. The best gigantic 300-pounders, they don't tend to exist without the hormones that they give cattle to get bigger. But as close as you're going to get, they're all going to the NFL. Or to rugby, or to any other sport that is more glamorous and less likely to get you killed for no money in your own country. But I think when you say heavyweights are shit, and I do often say heavyweights are generally shit, I think you get there's this perception that you have to either love heavyweights like a good red-blooded American, or you have to, if you hate heavyweights, you have to love flyweights, and then you get like, oh, so do you like watching midgets fight? And I think the truth of it is, personally, I do enjoy watching either, but they are some of the worst divisions in men's MMA. As a general rule to live by, the further you get from men's lightweight, the smaller the crop of great fighters you're going to have, and the lower the standard is probably going to be. Hello, Mr. Slack. Following on from previous game talk, do you think the easiest way of getting a Fight Night game made is using Zuffa Boxing as a means of a cheap roster, then adding some heavyweights like Fury and AJ? It would probably turn off all hardcore boxing fans, but would sell to UFC fans. It's not like we're ever going to get Floyd. John Morgan's many polo shirts bless, from Phil. I have been gagging for a Fight Night follow-up for, well, what is it, like a decade now? That was so much fun. Fight Night, was it round 4, and then Fight Night Champion. Fantastic games, particularly to play online, and it always felt like if you won or lost, it was because you were out-fought by the opponent, whereas, this gives me a chance to rant about the new EA UFC, which I installed, played for a couple of days, was like, this is shit, and then I just deleted it from my hard drive. EA Sports UFC 4 is not great. It's slower, it's floatier. They added a clinch system, which, it's not great fun to play, even once you understand it. I mean, ultimately, it's just not enjoyable. I think that's the thing. And it's like the stand-up aspect of EA UFC 3 was enjoyable. You could get into some fun back-and-forth scraps with that. You could, get to reading people, seeing what they do. Whereas the grappling on the ground was just spazzing out. And you'd meet the occasional dude who'd mastered the shit submission game, but you're just like, I'm not going to grind hours in the worst minigame I've ever played. Whereas UFC 4, basically, the grappling's still garbage, regardless of the control scheme that you use, and the striking is slow and unresponsive. Which is weird, because in many other respects it seems to have just been like, slap some new shit on the old UFC game, which is, that's the standard procedure for sports titles, but they managed to do it in a way that made the striking, which was the good part about the game. The EA Sports UFC 3 was a fun kickboxing game with some shit grappling stuck on it. They managed to make that bit unenjoyable as well. Now, you can always counter with the, this guy must not be very good at the game, but, wasn't very good at the third one, and that was fun. So, in terms of the boxing, it's weird, because boxing does still have a die-hard demographic, and even more than that, boxing games, you would think there's more of a market for it than there are people who would regularly watch boxing, because it's an excellent fighting game. But no, EA has had no interest in doing that in years. It might be because it's so hard to secure all the likenesses. Some of those Fight Night games, they had to get a division where they had like Nonito Donaire and one other dude in. There was no point. But in regards to the Zuffa Boxing idea, I mean, it's not bad as long as they can sign some fucking boxers and then try and make it like a, do the Punch Out or the old Fight Night thing, which was to have a load of created characters, just, made up dudes. Or like in Def Jam, you just have a load of made up people to go along with all the real people. But I think something interesting you said there is it's not like we're ever going to get Floyd. Floyd was in most of those Fight Night games. He was in a few of them. And the thing about Floyd Mayweather is that he will put his name on whatever. Like while he is the highest paid athlete, was the highest paid athlete in sports, there's not a lot of sponsors want to attach themselves to him, so he doesn't have a lot of money-making schemes that way, because of the violence against women and so on. So, like, Burger King paid him, I think it was $1 million to have the King walk him to the ring, and that would be quite a low endorsement for someone making as much money as Floyd, you'd think, but he was happy to have it because so few other companies actually want to be associated with the Floyd Mayweather brand. Plus, you just know, I mean, that Mayweather loves using the UFC for clout anyway. He'll put on a pair of, this happened like 2 years ago, he put on a pair of UFC gloves, shadowboxed in front of a camera, and people lost their shit. It's so easy for this guy to play you because there are so many idiots in the world who will share this and go, oh my god, is Mayweather coming to the UFC? He would love to be in a Zuffa boxing game, I'm sure. I'm sure he'd love to be in EA Sports UFC 4. But yes, Fight Night fun, UFC not. Make another Fight Night is the gist. I don't care if it has no famous fighters in. I honestly, I would love to see a studio just steal the control scheme. Because, I mean, we've got to be approaching the copyright limit on that control scheme. Because, you know, I don't know if this is still the case, but back in the day, EA used to find something to do with the right analog stick for every iteration of FIFA or Madden or whatever they were doing. It would be called, like, EA Freestyle Control, TM. And I think the Fight Night system was like EA Total Punch Control, TM. And if you just, like, if it's run out, the limit on that, fucking steal it. If it's not, use the face buttons. Most people did anyway. But that's enough nerding out about game shit. Cheers, Phil. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I'll be back later in the week to talk about this mediocre card, and there's a decent Bellator card coming up, actually, so we'll talk about that too, and some One stuff. And in the meantime, I'll probably do something Frankie Edgar related for the Patreon boys, or I might just go out of left field and do something that I want to do just for fun. If you want to support the podcast, get all the extra stuff we do for the Patreon boys, and just be a solid chap all round, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonbypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Parker Porter's Paunch Bless.